Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time. Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Binus, and I'm a psychiatrist. And I'm joined today by my co-host,
Amanda Anguish, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Well, today's topic is something very scary. I am shaking already in my boots here. I've been so nervous about this. What do you think it might be? Well, it's actually going to be on fear. So if you have experienced fear, which we all have, or maybe you continue to experience fear, which can be a struggle for many of us, this podcast is for you. And we're not only going to talk about fear and what that is, but also some practical ways to deal with fear. So, Amanda, let's go ahead and dig right into it. What is the definition of fear? What are we talking about when it comes to fear?
Yeah, so fear is an unpleasant emotion. I don't know of anybody who actually loves the feeling of fear. Maybe some diehard, extreme sports kind of people. But it's an unpleasant emotion that is based on a perceived or real belief that there's something dangerous about to happen or something dangerous could happen.
Okay. And is this something that is common when we talk about especially fear-related disorders and that sort of thing? Do people struggle with this? Because sometimes we are afraid and then we think like, oh, I must be the only person struggling with this.
Yeah. So actually, there's probably, I think, you never know how they figure out the numbers on these things, but it's believed that in 2019, sometimes these studies take a while to catch up to the current date, but there were about 40 million people in the United States that had some kind of disorder or mental illness related to fear. And then even that same year, they say that over 300 million people in the whole world deal with some kind of disorder or mental illness related to fear.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of those things that is, I think, a lot more common than some of us might realize. And
some people live in a state of fear.
Yes, that's true. And so if you are struggling with that, then you're not alone. And I think that's important to realize because fear, part of the fear can often be like, I'm the only one struggling with this, and it can certainly isolate, and that can just perpetuate and actually worsen the fear.
Yeah, we have fears of, sometimes people fear abandonment, they fear judgment, they fear, we have that FOMO, fear of missing out. We have the fear of something bad happening. So there's all different types of fears that we can experience, but some people tend to experience a lot more fear than others.
Yes, that is true. But again, the good news is that we can do things about that. And I think one of the first things that I've realized even in my own life is to admit, when we are having fear. Because one thing I realized really quickly, it was actually after I had started my mental health work, I hadn't experienced too many issues with fear, but there was one time where I just had this kind of feeling wash over my body. And it was just this feeling of apprehension. And I was like, I'm experiencing fear. But it was really good because I recognized it and I was able to name it instead of like trying to fight it. I was able to allow it to kind of pass through my body. And I think sometimes when I've dealt with patients or even personal acquaintances, and they're just like, no, I can't experience fear and I won't admit it.
I don't fear anything.
Right. Exactly.
Nothing bothers me or nothing makes it's scary to me.
And we should never be afraid.
Yeah.
What I've noticed is a lot of times when we don't admit to the fear, it just builds up,
Yeah.
and then it can get a lot worse.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think that's the cool part of working in mental illness. You become a lot more open to talking about things when you realize, as a provider or practitioner, when we're hearing these things all the time, it's like, oh, I'm not the only one who experiences fear. They're not the only one. There's so many people that experience it. And there's nothing wrong with admitting being human and having human features like unpleasant emotions such as fear.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the neurophysiology, what's actually going on in our brain and our bodies when it comes to fear.
Yeah. So within 1/10 of a millisecond, your amygdala responds to any kind of external stimuli or maybe even sometimes internal stimuli that suggests that there's something to be fearful of. So your body is primed and ready to protect you, whatever it thinks it's going to do for that, to respond to anything that might cause fear.
So you're saying that far before we can actually think about, should I be afraid or not, our body and our mind are already deciding what we should be afraid of or not.
Yeah, we're literally following what our body is doing to respond to that. Now, here's the thing. When that happens, the body is going to respond with, that fight, flight, or freeze response, which includes things like adrenaline and cortisol. But the prefrontal cortex also has the ability to temper that when it acknowledges maybe afterwards that something isn't so scary or fear-inducing that we thought might be happening.
That's really interesting because, again, going back to that whole feeling guilty or ashamed about having fear, the reality is we can't actually help initially. What we're afraid of, it's just this automatic response. Now, like you said, there are modifying things we can do, but I think it's really important to realize, like, hey, just naturally we're going to be afraid of certain things, and other things we're not going to be afraid of.
It's like being embarrassed that you had eyes. Like, they're there for a reason, and our fear is there for a reason. I believe God put that fear in us, or that ability to have fear, to protect us from things. Imagine if you had, a car careening at you and you're in your car and you have the ability to get out of the way. Well, what's going to induce you to want to get out of the way?
Yes.
It's the fear that comes in you, that response from your amygdala or whatever your amygdala is doing in that moment that says, I need to do something about this.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's not something, fear isn't something to fear. We can appreciate it and learn to work with it.
Yes. The only problem is, of course, there's situations where maybe we become afraid of things that are actually not harmful. And that's where it can start to be a problem, right?
Yeah. So that's actually, that's there's a term called fear conditioning. So sometimes we learn to fear things that maybe other people wouldn't naturally fear because we associate something completely normal, neutral, whatever, with something, unpleasant or fearful inducing. And so when we put those things together, that doesn't mean we're putting them together, but when that happens to us, then what we do is we associate that thing all the time with it. So for instance, they did a study at Harvard Medical School with rats. Poor things, they always do these studies.
The rats always get the short end of the stick, right?
So what they did is they associated a very calm tone with an electric shock. So then, what happens now when the rats hear this calm tone is
freaking out.
They're fearful of calm tone. And that can be the same way that, maybe I can be conditioned to fear getting up in front of people because I associate getting up in front of people with like jeers and sneers and laughing and that sort of thing. But getting up in front of people doesn't have to be a fearful thing. It's associated with that. But, what does that look like if I'm growing up then and I have, parents that yell when I get a certain grade or something? Well, the grade isn't the bad thing. It's the association that I have with the grade, which it could be yelling or some kind of abuse or harm or that sort of thing. So many of us, we're not responding to true fear things. We're responding to the meaning that we give to those, which is fear conditioning.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because as you're talking, I'm thinking about some of those patients that have come into my office and they will say, I just want to let you know, I'm really uncomfortable and afraid right now because I know it's not you, but in childhood, I had an abusive dad or there was a male figure in my life. And so I'm just afraid of men, right?
Yeah.
So obviously they know logically that not all men are bad, but their body just can't help feeling that fear because they have that conditioning response.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I'm not sure if you and I talked about this once before in a podcast, but I remember, you know, one of the things that, or as I was thinking about this, I think of random things when I'm talking to clients and they bring up things that, you know, gets me going off on another thought. But I started thinking about horror movies. A lot of people, you know, they like to be fearful or have fear in their lives. And I thought about what makes the best horror movie or fear movie, if you want to call it that. And that's taking something that is benign,
Like a doll?
like a doll or a clown. You know, clowns you weren't always scary, or even in some cases a child or a relative, like a mom or a dad or something, and then associating something terrifying with
Something
it.
evil. Something.
So then what does that
Yes.
do? Now I'm conditioned to look at those things differently because I watched this movie of this like horrible clown or this child that had these like evil features. And so that's one of the things that we notice when it comes to like fear conditioning too. We're actually conditioning people to be scared of those things. And now what do people say about clowns?
They're scary.
Yeah. People don't like clowns anymore they're associated with a horror movie and being terrified.
But it's also interesting, like you said, there is, at the very least, we'd say a subculture of people that really kind of, you might almost say, enjoy that adrenaline kick. And it's not just like the kind of classic positive adrenaline kick of a roller coaster or something like that. And I was thinking about like, why is that? And I think part of that might be because we're so used to being stimulated in our culture now that in order to even feel anything and have any kind of sense of like really being emotionally alive, so to speak, and stimulated, and we need this really high level of stimulation, which just is, to me, sad because we can't even enjoy like the lower levels of stimulation, like a beautiful sunset or, you know, something like that might be in the past like, oh yeah, that would give me enough stimulation. Now it's like we need these high levels that really even kick in our amygdala in a big way, our
Absolutely.
adrenaline and all that.
Yeah, I was actually working with a young lady years and years ago, not too early in my practice, but earlier in my practice, and or of being a therapist. And I remember her telling me about her life and everything. And I was like, oh man, this just sounds like awful. Her life seems so difficult. And I remember her saying, well, this is all I know, like to always be in adrenaline mode. So when you are in adrenaline mode, it can feel like a high too. We can become addicted to fear because we don't know better that it's actually creating in us something that is unhealthy, but we become so desensitized to it. I mean, little kids wouldn't normally be able to watch something terrifying.
That's true.
But we're obviously desensitizing them to that. And then they don't even flinch when something bad happens because maybe their environment or the things they've been exposed to in movies and music and otherwise are normal to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And along those lines, as we get used to a certain level of adrenaline in our bodies, I think our physiological system, our body, mind, and everything will try to maintain a degree of homeostasis. And so then let's say that the stressors that we were afraid of go away. I've seen a lot of people will actually almost seek subconsciously, not maybe intentionally, but will seek other things to stress them and fear and be worried or afraid of because they're used to being at this certain level of fear.
So those people actually have a fear of calm
Yeah.
and normalcy in their lives. And that's why they're seeking that too. So even then, if you have a fear of calm, you can learn to desensitize yourself to that fear.
It feels really uncomfortable to be calmer, and it's almost an oxymoron.
Yeah, so you can be, and that was the situation with that young lady that I was working with, is she was actually fearful of like normalcy and calm and just being at peace.
So what are some maybe body postures or things that you can take note of that would tell you that either yourself or maybe somebody else around you is fearful?
Yeah, so they did some studies and they noticed, this was Harvard Medical School as well. They did this, or they noted that if you put your hands up like as a shield, even across from somebody else, then that other person, when they take that in, it actually stimulates three parts of the brain: parts that oversee emotion, parts that oversee vision, and action. So if you have a posture of like protecting yourself or that sort of thing, then it stimulates those certain parts of the brain to respond. But if you have what they call a happy posture, that was a fearful posture. If you have a happy posture and you're across from that person and their hands are just like gently to the side or relaxed to the side, as in being open for an embrace, the only part of the brain that it activated was the vision part. So it shows that the way that we respond to these things, even the fear that we might have or not have, it's relating to something that we're taking in, and that's what it's actually doing in our body to us. So if you want to create a fear in others, then put your hands up, or keep them face forward like you're pushing them away.
Posture.
Defensive.
And they're probably in a way like almost primed to like, okay, I'm out of here because this person doesn't want me here, right?
Yeah. And they even noted too, I didn't put this in my notes, but they even noted as well that if you're across from somebody and they have a very aggressive look on their face and they're looking at you, it was less fear-inducing as if they had an angry or aggressive look on their face and they were looking off to the side. So it actually invokes more fear in us when we see somebody who is kind of like this. Because you don't know what's going on, but at least you have eye contact with the person if they're looking at you and you can sort of see what's going on. I thought that was quite interesting. I'm not sure of the ramifications of that, but I thought, wow, that's so interesting that even having the eye gaze gives you something to like, I can work with this, versus if they're looking off to the side, well, what could it be? Are you looking off because, you're angry at me, or you're scared of something else?
So what about things that we can actually do to deal with fear?
Well, kind of going back to what we initially started talking about was that fear is normal. Just understanding that fear is normal, especially when we're taking on new things. Like anytime, that term fear of the unknown, anytime we don't know what to expect, there's always going to be an element of fear. So trying something new, meeting somebody you don't know, or being in a certain scenario that you've never been in before, all of those things, it's quite normal and quite human to experience some level of fear in those situations.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're saying part of it is just normalizing and realizing it's normal.
It's literally one of the many human emotions we all should expect to experience.
So fear, again, like you mentioned earlier, is not the enemy. It's just saying, hey, something's going on here. Pay attention. It could be dangerous. Maybe it's not, but you have to figure that out and then decide what to do with it, kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's the same with, we have all kinds of alarms in our car and that sort of thing. Not alarms, but, signals that say something could be wrong with the engine. Well, right now, if I'm honest, I have one of those tire deflated lights that are on.
I think those are chronically on in most cars, so you're not alone.
I think so. Well, my husband decided to fix something himself. And, well, he doesn't know how to turn off that signal. So we know that the signal does not mean the tire is flat or low on air because we're checking it regularly. But that's the same with fear. Fear does not necessarily mean something is dangerous. It just means that something could be dangerous. I want to engage my prefrontal cortex to make sure that what I might feel fearful of actually has some legitimacy behind
it. Kind of reminds me of dogs, right? So sometimes dogs, especially if they're not trained very well, will just bark at anything. They'll bark at a lizard, they'll bark at a bunny, and then they'll bark, of course, at a mountain lion or coyotes. So they bark dangerous things and not dangerous things. And so it's up to the owner to kind of try to figure out, okay, is that actually legit? Like, is that something that I need to be concerned about? Is that an intruder, or is it just a lizard, right?
Yeah, or it could be because fear conditioning. Maybe that dog had experienced something scary in the past, and maybe you adopted it from the pound or something like that, and you don't realize that there's some conditioning that's also and then involved in that dog barking the way that it is over nothing.
So then once we normalize it and figure out like, okay, this is a normal part of my human experience, what can we do to cope with the fear, and especially maybe retrain the dog, if you will, or, really help us to realize that we don't, that part of our brain that's just firing off doesn't always need to be firing off so strongly in certain situations.
Yeah, so one of the things that we can do that if we realize like, wow, I'm over firing on these things, is to actually do some grounding techniques. That's a whole category in and of itself. So you can do multiple different things with that. Sometimes it's, you'll often, or at least I've seen people just kind of rub their arm. That's one thing that you can do. We recommend with people the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. I've seen it in other places called the 3-3-3 technique, but I'll just tell you about the 5-4-3-2-1, 5 things I can see. So you just start naming things that you can see. You could do it out loud, but really try to focus on each thing and recognize what it is, maybe even its function, whatever. And then 4 things that you can touch, and then actually touch them and notice the textures of them. So the armrest on my chair is very smooth, and I can feel the wood in it. The fabric on the seat cushion is different. It has some almost like veining or some texture to it. My pants are a little bit different than that. My shirt has a different texture. Go through different things, and actually even the microphone, if I were to squeeze it, I don't want to ruin the sound, but it has a very squishy feeling to it. All of these things I'm noticing, and I'm naming and acknowledging. And then the three things that I can hear. Well, what can you hear right now?
I can hear kind of a high buzzing sound of a fan in the computer.
I can hear your voice.
Yes.
Those kinds of things. I can hear our sound person cracking his fingers. I hope nobody else can hear that. I can hear the sound of laughter. That's more than 3 things. And then 2 things that I can smell. Now, this is where we can get a little creative because you can't always smell things. I'm trying to think of anything in here that I can smell. Nothing that's standing out, but man, I can smell, if I really get my imagination going, I can smell grapefruit. It's one of my favorite smells. So I can
imagine, even if you're not near it. So
I have no.
Sorry, I was a little nervous there. I was like, okay, I think I wore deodorant today. So good. Okay, you didn't smell it.
Nothing unusual. Maybe it's just the natural smells of being here that are so normal to me. But then, maybe I can smell a candle that I have at home and it smells like lavender or something.
So you can imagine these. You don't have to.
Oh, I don't have to literally be there to smell it. Okay. I can imagine these smells. And then the last one is taste. Something I can taste. It could be your favorite meal. It could be something you really like. It could be the salt in the air if you're at the beach or something like that. Whatever it is, like really hone in on what that taste is, and if it's your favorite meal, the different aspects of the meal, like the mashed potatoes or something, they're real smooth and like make me all happy inside to feel those. Well, what have you noticed throughout all of this? I'm not focusing on the fear or the anxiety anymore because I've really honed into all of my other senses. And a lot of times fear can be about what's coming up. Well, it takes a lot of energy to think of what's coming up when you're already spending your energy doing what's right here and right now. So it's really taking the energy away from that fear and putting into something else that's much more calming and peace-inducing.
Yeah, and it really is helping physiologically to calm down that fight or flight in the process, so that then the logical part of your mind can kind of come online and be like, okay, now we can decide what to do with whatever I was feeling afraid of, or whatever I was really feeling uncomfortable about, and take some next steps that are using more the logical part of my mind rather than that reactivity part.
Yeah, and you'll notice, I mean, you should notice the brain can't do two things at the same time, or can't think about two things at the same time. So when you distract yourself from the fear, what you're doing is when you come back to it later, because your brain's not going to ignore it forever, but when you come back to it later, usually it's not as bad. Like there's some dissipation in that fear because I focused on something else and I'm not caught up in the emotion part of it as well.
So anything else that we can do dealing with fear?
Yeah. So another thing that we can do that I find really helpful, and I know others have too that I've worked with, is just recognizing that the meaning I give to it is what creates the fear, keeps the fear going, or helps reduce the fear. So many times, like we were talking earlier, if I tell myself when I get up on stage, people are going to tell me that I've done a bad job, or if I try to reinforce some idea that I'm going to trip when I get up on stage or when I walk up there, or I'm going to do a horrible job, well, now I'm actually creating a fear-induced or a difficult environment for myself. So of course I'm going to look at getting up on stage as being a terrifying or fear-inducing thing. So even changing the meaning, like in another way to assign meaning to that is, wow, this is a victorious opportunity that I'm going to get up there, I'm going to say what I'm supposed to say, and I'm going to come down. And even if people were to jeer, sneer, or make fun of me, I've done something that a lot of people are scared to do, and I've accomplished that, and they're not up there.
Yeah. So the way you really think about the physiology that you're experiencing, and essentially, we could say probably reframe what you're experiencing, and your belief about the adrenaline that's being released it really makes a big difference on the overall outcome.
Yeah. And this really does have a lot to do with anxiety too. And one of the things that we can reframe too is what's happening in our body. In one instance, we might say like, oh, this means I'm going to die. Like all of my organs are imploding and I can just feel this horrible sensation happening. Sometimes we'll even say, I've got knots in my stomach when something is scary. But what do we say when the same experience is happening and we're in love? I've got butterflies in my stomach. True. So it's a reframe of what's happening. And one of the things I like to remind myself is that, this is my body's way of protecting me, taking care of me, but it's just it's just the consultant. I'm the CEO. So I get to decide what I do with what my consultant tells me. And my consultant right now is the fear talking. Do I want to listen entirely to the fear, or do I want to decide to veto what they're saying, what the fear is saying, and do something else based on other things that I might know?
It reminds me of a study they did actually in the Harvard School of Business, where they had two types of speakers. Essentially, one group of speakers, they told them that they were supposed to tell themselves during the speech that I am calm and I am doing a good job and I'm giving a good speech. So, but the big message was I'm calm. And the other group was supposed to tell themselves that I'm excited. And it was very interesting that the speakers who were telling themselves that I'm excited about the presentation and the subject that I'm giving were rated as more confident and better speakers than the ones that were just telling themselves, like, essentially, I need to be calm and viewed as having it all together, right? And so it really helps us to see that how we deal with the physiology of that, those neurotransmitters that are coming up and what we're thinking about them, and how if we're trying to just fight them and suppress them versus allowing them to kind of like express, that it can make a big difference.
Yeah, and I think that's part of being mindful too, is getting to know your body and what are the different aspects of it. And should I accept fear as a normal human function, or should I be terrified of it and think that I must have some horrible disease and that I'm going to die from?
Yeah. So what about like some of these irrational fears that are pretty like how could we potentially start overcoming some of those? Let's say I have just this really irrational, and maybe, when we look at it, it's like, okay, well, no wonder it's actually not that irrational because you had this horrible experience with, water when you were a child. So it's not irrational that you are deathly afraid of getting in a pool or something like that. But then there are other things where it's like, I'm really afraid that I'm going to get, germs on my hand. And so, there can be some pretty extreme irrational fears that some of us sometimes deal with. How do we deal with that and change that over time?
So all of those different things are symptoms of anxiety disorders. Things like, OCD, PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, even social anxiety, which often people think social anxiety has to do with I'm afraid of being around people, but it's more specifically I'm fearful of the judgment I might get from being seen by them in a certain light and that sort of thing. So anytime I have these fears, remember, many times our fears come from the unknown. So the key feature in overcoming our fears is get to know the things we're afraid of. Obviously within reason. But if I'm afraid of water, well, then I should learn about water. If I'm afraid of germs, well, let me learn something about germs. By the way, a lot of people, I don't want to, make anybody upset, but when you think of antibacterial, those lotions and gels and things that we use, well, the assumption there often is that all bacteria is bad. Because what are we trying to do? Yeah. Kill bacteria. But if we actually get to know more about bacteria, we find out that quite a bit of bacteria can actually be good.
Yes.
How do we know this? Well, if you eat yogurt, a lot of people are eating yogurt to try to build bacteria, get good bacteria. So if I learn about that, well, now I have this totally different view. I'm being exposed to the thing that I'm afraid of, and I'm actually learning more about it, which can help me. I could be afraid of dogs. Are all dogs scary? Well, some might be scary if they're not trained well, if they're very aggressive. But does that mean I should be afraid of all dogs? That's where phobias is also an anxiety disorder. And so what we call all of this is exposure therapy. Okay. And it's the gold standard of how do I deal with my fears is I get to learn about them, and I slowly, bit by bit, I'm exposing myself to aspects of them until I can get to the point where I can say, wow, I'm not so afraid of that anymore. And I can be in that environment around those people, whatever the case may be, that ultimately reduces that fear and anxiety.
So the exposure therapy. And when you have clients or other people that and they're trying to overcome specific fears, is it helpful to be pretty regimented? How do you actually do that exposure process?
Yeah, so whatever, some people like generalized anxiety disorder. That just means I have anxiety in many different aspects of my life. In that case, I've probably been conditioned at some point to be quite fearful. Having a parent with anxiety would
never know what's going to kind of happen next.
If I'm insecure about my abilities to handle things, it would be very easy to have generalized anxiety disorder. So what we do, if that's your situation, is you might write down, 10 things that you have anxiety about. And then you rate those on a scale of 1 to 10, and then you put them in order of the thing that you're least anxious about all the way up to the thing that you're most anxious about. And you can start with, okay, I'm going to work on this thing. I have a lot of anxiety. I'm going to get used to being in a situation with this. It's maybe like a 1 level of anxiety. Then I'm going to work on the next thing. Or you can also take something that you have terrible anxiety about, and you can, say if it's a phobia of spiders. Well, maybe I talk with my therapist or my friend about spiders. I learn about spiders. There's no spider involved in this.
No spider in the room.
No
Wait,
spiders.
there's one right there.
No spiders involved yet. We're just talking about them. And I get to the point where maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most anxious, I can get to myself like at a 2 or a 3. Okay, well, now maybe I'm willing to look at a picture of a spider. And I continue to look at pictures of spiders, obviously in a nice controlled environment. I'm not just being thrown a room full of pictures of spiders, but just here's this spider. Let's learn about this spider. How do you feel? And you do that until you get down to maybe a 2 or 3 level of anxiety.
So you start with the smiling spiders, and then you end up with the angry spiders. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So it's like a graded exposure. Okay.
Absolutely. And then maybe you actually look at a video of spiders. So now they're moving. They're not in the room with me, but they're moving. And I'm watching the videos of the spiders until I get down to a 2 or 3 from a level 10 anxiety or fear. And then maybe I see a spider nicely contained in a... Now, I just know some people who are listening right now that have
I
fear.
was just thinking, I was like, hey, we're doing this great exposure exercise for our listeners that have arachnophobia, right?
Yes. So somebody listening is going, I have fear and that's what they're going to make me do. I'm going to have to, face my fear. But if you do it in the proper way, you're going to be doing it little by little until you get to the place. And this is the promise. You get to the place where you feel the same way about that thing that somebody else that doesn't have any fear of it feels. So it's not just you suddenly being thrown into that environment. You're ramping up a little bit at a time until you feel the same way that person that's always thinking, why are you so afraid of this? You feel the same way they do about it. So that's the promise at the end of it, is that through enough exposure. Now, this is also the case we talked about earlier with, well, what if we're dealing with somebody who's exposed themselves to like crazy things and they're fearful now of calm things? Well, you might have to expose yourself to those things too, little by little. Okay, I'm going to sit in nature. I'm not used to not having...
Spend 5 minutes doing nothing.
Yeah.
Oh, this is crazy making.
And then 6 minutes of doing nothing, and then 7 minutes. And you're not really doing nothing. There's no way to do nothing. But maybe it's just being alone with your thoughts for 5 minutes and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's great. So anything else that we should keep in mind dealing with fear?
Yeah, so as we do exposure therapy, one of the things that we're also hoping to do is associate new memories with those things. Okay. So we call these safety memories. When we've experienced trauma or fear in a situation, we already have created a memory of that being a scary, fearful situation. So the more I do that, then I'm creating safety memories. And when I bank up enough safety memories, that's when I should be having the experience of, oh, wow, that's not so scary anymore. That's not so fearful anymore. Because I have time after time after time experience saying, actually, this is safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to some of those people that have fear of men because of past abuse, etc., then it would be having enough positive, safe interactions with safe men.
Yes.
That over time, it's like, okay, now I see that, yeah, there are some harmful and dangerous men, but there's also the possibility of very positive, good experiences too.
Yeah, and that can be with anything, with dogs, with women even, We don't always just hear men. Sometimes
women can be very dangerous too.
Watch out. But, then we realize that we live in a world that does have danger. There are fearful things, but ultimately, we want to build up the confidence to be able to handle those things. If I'm always in a state of fear, I'm always playing defense. But life isn't just about playing defense. It's about playing offense too. And that's where you score the points. That's where you get the celebration moments in life, when you actually get to, accomplish something. You're not just waiting for something bad to happen. And that's the unfortunate thing when our amygdala is constantly overfiring and overreacting, is we never get to actually enjoy life. And I see far too often it could be parents that, I'm so fearful my child might be messed up in the future, that you don't get to play with your child and enjoy and take pleasure in them. Or I'm so fearful I'm going to get a car accident, I don't enjoy the freedom of driving, And life is about enjoying things, not just constantly playing defense.
Yeah. So fear, even though it's not a bad thing in and of itself, we don't want it to hold us hostage, to control our lives. And so we want to manage it in the proper way. Well, thank you. Any other closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say a little bit, we believe in God and we believe in the Bible, and we also believe that the Bible has a lot of really wonderful things, mental health wise, even for us to read and understand. And I just want to assure people that are listening to, if you have a fear of God, because maybe you've heard like that we're to fear God, I want them to understand that that's a biblical version of fear. And what that means in the Bible is to have reverence or awe for somebody. We know this because there are people probably in our lives where we look up to them and we have a certain amount of fear, like I would never want to say the wrong thing to that person and have them think of me differently. But it's not a fear like I'm afraid of what they'll do to me.
They're going to abuse me or...
Yeah, it's not that kind of fear. It's that I just so respect this person that I want them to see the best, from me, and I want to attain to better things because of that. And then there's a couple verses in the Bible too that I use quite often with my clients. And the first one I'll just share is 2 Timothy 1:7, and it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear." So fear is, the scary fear is not from God. Like He doesn't give us that. And it says, "So for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind." And I often think, well, aren't those the antidote to fear? If I feel powerful, I'm not going to fear things.
Yes.
If I love somebody, I'm not going to fear what they can do to me because there's just too much love to fear that unknown of could they hurt me. And then also if I have a sound mind, I'm not fearful of what I might even do. I have a sense of, I could handle this no matter what happens. I could figure it out. And those three things are what God gives us. He doesn't give us fear. Okay. And then the next verse that I want to share, the last verse I want to share, is 1 John 4:18, and it says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear." And so when we have perfect, or that's another scary word for some people, perfect means complete. When we have complete love, it casts out fear. So the more love you have inside of us, learn to cultivate love for people, for things, for God, then that's what casts out fear too.
Mm-hmm. And also receiving His perfect love, because that's the only way our love can become complete.
Yes,
right?
And Christ is the ultimate perfection that we get to claim in order to be complete ourselves.
Oh, it's beautiful. And it reminds me too, David, one of the most courageous, brave men of all time, David and Goliath, he was obviously the courage of a lion, right? He wrote, not, "I should never be afraid," or "I'm never afraid because I always trust in God." He said, "When I am afraid, I will trust in you."
Yeah.
And so it's a beautiful, and of course he wrote that to God. He was saying, I do have times of fear, but
let's be real.
Yeah, he was very real, right? He was authentic. And sometimes we feel guilty, especially as Christians. We're like, I should never be afraid, right? But he said, when I am afraid, so admit. But then what do? We have the opportunity to choose where we turn. And when we turn to God, we have the opportunity to trust in Him and say, I don't get it. This is scary. I admit that, but I want to trust in you. God will cast out that fear, like He said.
Absolutely. Good.
All right.
To end on.
Well, thank you, Amanda, for sharing your words of wisdom. And to all our listeners, I hope that you found some practical tips that will help you to cope with any fear in your life, and also realize that this is a normal part of the existence of being human. It's not a bad thing, but we don't need to allow fear to control us. May you all have a wonderful and beautiful day. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Your engagement will help us reach more people who need encouragement. To hear more episodes, learn about our other mental health resources, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.